Um, wow, that was quite a presentation. It's going to be difficult for me to follow that. How's everybody doing? I think when I was talking to David about what I should talk about at this presentation, I think a lot of sort of themes came up while we were talking about the audience and what does it mean to be an investor? What does it mean to be doing a startup these days? And I just thought I would share with you guys some kind of interesting aspects of my career journey that kind of relate to this concept that is, I think, the biggest idea, which is sort of the movement away from sort of the kind of ideas of sort of destructive capitalism and disruption, and which was, of course, the big theme of the sort of early 2000s movements of startups, into kind of a new phase, I think, that is definitely beginning to take shape. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the experiences I've had over the last couple of days, which really is about collaboration, how sort of multi-institutional, multi-business, multi-sector collaboration is actually going to be a really key defining feature of how really interesting products and companies emerge in various innovation ecosystems. So let me first totally agree with Sean about ChatGPT. There's a great word. You probably have heard of it. I hope it's going to be the Oxford Word of the Year. Enshittification. Have anyone heard of this word? It is a ubiquitous word, and it's about the kind of sort of deluge of word shit that is coming across us through social media because of AI. And just like you guys, I get all kinds of crazy LinkedIn requests and emails that have strange bullet points and M dashes and spacing exactly like that every day, and it is very disheartening. So I completely agree. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So I am Canadian. All Canadians start by saying that, so I guess I'll do that. From Edmonton, Alberta. Go Oilers. And I was born and raised there, and I did my PhD there in biochemistry. So I'm actually a virologist, a scientist, and moved to New York about 25 years ago with my wife, who's a doctor at Sloan Kettering, which is just around the corner. And I decided that I was going to, after all the struggle of being a scientist, decided to abandon science entirely and just not do that for a career, because I found that science was, while thrilling and intellectually fascinating, was like just it was a bit too hermetic a lifestyle, and I'm kind of a people person, and it was a bit odd for me. So I left and became a professional singer, and that's what we're doing. And actually became an actor, and I was an actor here on Broadway, and did films and wrote screenplays and did all kinds of really interesting things for a number of years. And I was kind of looking for professionally, just because as an actor, you're kind of working or you're not working. It's very sort of cyclical. I was looking for an opportunity to take all the science knowledge that I had and see if I could combine it with my interest in media and the arts. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up cold calling one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. At that time, it was called McCann Erickson, or McCann, you probably heard of it. And so they were the bad guys in Mad Men, if you ever watched that show. And so it was hilarious. I said, hi, I'm the scientist guy, and I'm kind of an actor, and is there any work that you have for me? And it was a really interesting time in science where a lot of the public investments that had been made in HIV research throughout the 80s and early 90s, they had sort of come to a head, and a lot of really fascinating new drugs for cancer, for virology, for like all these new sort of what were called at the time rationally designed drugs were coming onto the market. And these ad agencies, who advertise both to consumers and to physicians, they had no idea like how to deal with any of this because they didn't really understand these drugs. So they needed people who are scientists, who are scientific backgrounds, to really kind of like explain to the creatives and to the strategists what this was all about. So anyway, long story short, I got a job in advertising, and that was my sort of day job, and I was working as a strategist and trying to figure out how to like launch these drugs into all these global markets. And it was a really great fit for me because I like learning, and I learned the process of advertising and communication, which is very, very sort of surprisingly data-driven and complex and interesting and creative. And I loved working with these sort of multidisciplinary teams. And it's very collaborative, very similar in a sense to science. And so I did that for like over a decade and had a long career doing that. And then, like 10 years into any job, you get incredibly bored, and I was just super bored because I learned how to do advertising. And so then I basically became an entrepreneur at McCann, and I told the CEO, and it's a kind of a long story that involves Bill Gates and President Obama, but I actually told my CEO, I want to do something inside this company where I can take the trade craft of advertising and use it for the public good. Because it's so powerful in its ability to persuade people that maybe if we could, instead of selling crap that's going to end up in a landfill, maybe we could use the power of persuasion and art and music and great editing and things like that to do something very, very good. And so I ended up starting this division that still exists today at McCann. It was called McCann Global Health. And at the time, you probably remember the SDGs, there were all these big initiatives that were happening through the US government and through the UN and through a lot of the multilateral foundations, where they were essentially creating supply chains of essential medicines for really, really sort of terrible afflictions that killed children under the age of 5 and mothers in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And while they had created these supply chains, there was no demand. Like nobody was using any of the like different kinds of medicines that were brought into these areas. And so they wanted us at McCann to essentially advertise these drugs and in these very, very remote areas. And so we ended up doing that using our global footprint. And it was, and I led that effort, and it was super satisfying for me personally. And it was like a really, really interesting kind of introduction for me into the world of like what social impact looks like and how you can sort of create systems using so many different players to make money for your company, but at the same time do things that are relevant and really interesting and important. And so after that, I did that for a number of years, and then I realized that actually there's a much bigger idea here, and that is that this doesn't have to exist simply in medicine, because medicine is altruistic in a lot of ways. But you could do this broadly across many different fields, including social justice issues or renewable energy and climate change, things that are urgent problems in society. And you can use communications as a tool, as an intervention, to be able to kind of create some solutions. And so that's when I started my own company, and this was 13 years ago. We're a relatively boutique kind of creative agency, but we work, as I said, across like social issues, medical issues, as well as environmental issues. And the one thing I just kind of like to kind of put a cap in that, our company is called Emergence Creative. And one of the things we did is that we created in New York a big conference. You may have heard of it. It was called Smart Cities New York. It was a really, really big conference that brought together startups, huge corporations, social impact organizations, universities and academics, all together, and government agencies and government leaders, all together into the same place to discuss the problems that are occurring locally within cities all over the world. And it was a very, very successful conference. And until COVID, unfortunately, where all public meetings were basically collapsed. But what ended up happening is we restarted it at Cornell Tech, which is just across the river from here. And with Cornell Tech and Cornell University, we just had our 5th version of this conference yesterday. And one of the fascinating things about this conference is that it brings, as I said, all the various sectors together where huge problems that occur in cities, whether it's, there's too much congestion or air quality is poor, or, their vulnerable populations are worried about the risk of flooding because of climate change and the kind of resilience that's required in communities. All of these topics are discussed. And all of the startups and all of the innovators that are sort of working on this problem in various dimensions, they get to hear what the government officials say, they get to hear what the VCs are looking to invest in, and then they get to pitch their ideas to these organizations about what the kind of vision that they have and how they can contribute to the solution of the problem. And what's really interesting, one of our, my friend Simon over there is one of the people I started this conference with years ago. And another person that we started the conference with, he was the former Undersecretary of the Navy. His name is Jerry Hulton. He's an absolutely brilliant guy. And he was the kind of, the idea was his initially to start this conference. Because he, as a university professor, had noticed that when you get all kinds of people in a room together, that's when the magic happens. You know, it starts with a simple conversation, then it's just like what's happening here that David has started, but it's really when you start to bring people together and you start to share and exchange ideas, lots of fascinating things can happen. And over the decade that we've had this conference, we've seen, because of the conference, massive institutional changes. We've seen cool companies like just blow up and they're unicorns, and it's really been a cool experience. And so I guess the upshot lesson that I would say that I think is really important is that when the kind of early days of the internet were or the new sort of social part of the internet was happening, and all this kind of desire to destroy institutions and to break habits, you know, I think we can now look back and see that there were some good things that happened with that, but there were a lot of terrible things that happened with that. You know, there was downward economic pressure, for example, was put on very vulnerable people who are the lower end of every kind of economic chain. You saw, you know, big issues, of course, in social division and issues that are happening in society or can, you know, be directly related to the development of this technology without sort of understanding what the consequences are. But I do think, even if it's slower, the kind of collaboration among institutions, among regulators, among startups, among those productive discussions that are built on collaborative platforms are actually more likely to produce greater social impact as well as sort of longer lasting, more important companies. So that's basically all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you very much.